Yo, what's good, relatives? Good meet you, Billy here. Six Sun Riders. Um, Want to expound on this, on the aspect, on the topic that came up from my last video, where I was giving my thoughts on Hispanic Heritage Month and some community imperatives that I think would be good. So, thanks to everybody who watched the whole thing. If you watched the whole thing and gained some insight, I appreciate your time and checking it out. And so the I got a lot of positive comments, and the video did pretty good. One of my first videos got like one like 1,000 views in the first like couple of days, so that's pretty good. I was pretty flattered. So again, thank you to everybody who tuned in and checked it out. So a few of these comments came up in the comment section. Most of the comments were very positive. I mean, they were all positive. Even if people disagree, but a few times there's this remark or question about, why are we denying our Spanish blood? We shouldn't deny our Spanish heritage, etc. Mexicans shouldn't deny um, their Spanish blood and their Spanish heritage. Okay, so we're gonna address that. So first, again, to just as a reference, when I speak of this is primarily for Chicanos, Mexicanos, people of what I call the Mesoamerican diaspora. And when I say Mexicans, I'm referring because that can mean a lot of different things, right? The nationality, the actual Mishika nation from centuries ago. I use the word Mexican to refer to the people, brown people, and that's not literally like skin tone, but culturally the people who come from the indigenous Mesoamerican cultural continuity of the Mesoamerican area, or the area we generally call Mexico, regardless if people acknowledge their indigeneity or not. So that's what I'm referring to. I'm not really referring to the people who happen to be Mexican by nationality, or even if they've been there for generations. There's a lot of people in Mexico that don't come from that indigenous continuity, even though they all have some type of knowledge, or are familiar with some type of cultural traits from Mexico that's based off indigenous culture. But people who actually live and breathe the what I call, there's a term I use, just called indigenous trajectory. So the way I use the term indigenous trajectory, it refers to the way Mexicans with Mesoamerican roots, even the ones that don't identify as indigenous, continue to reflect native cultural and social patterns and cultural markers. It's about recognizing that despite denial of indigeneity or mixed heritage, our indigenous identity still guides our behaviors and how we're seen and acted towards by other peoples. So again, you don't have to acknowledge your indigenous roots, but um, the majority of Mexican people, or people who claim to be of Mexican ethnic background, are of Mesoamerican, predominantly Mesoamerican culture and identity, and of Mesoamerican indigenous trajectory. And another thing too, the question of like why don't Mexicans embrace their Spanish heritage or their Spanish blood? And that's a very loaded term, because all our families are very different. Even with my family, I've been over here in the Venice, West LA area for 5 generations now. I'm actually fifth generation, and we have I have nieces and nephews who are like sixth and seventh generation. And my family's from Michoacan, predominantly on my dad's side, and my mom's side is from Monterrey, La Guachichil. She's Spanish, and so my family has been here since the early 20s over here in the area. But over here, people know West LA, Venice. Like now, it's very gentrified, very homogenized, and it's kind of headed that way, unfortunately. But it's always been, even back, let's say gentrification started here about 30 years ago. So before that, it was it's always been a pretty diverse area. A lot of of course, predominantly white, mostly Mexican, a lot of black folks, Japanese, Asian, even a lot of Asian, as far Japanese and Filipinos, as well as I guess Indian or people, of the Hindu background, I guess you can say Indonesia, people like that. And overall, pretty, very, very diverse, but predominantly white, Mexican, black, I would say. So your family's different, right? Again, five generations here. And while most of us, are very, um, look like me in the sense that, like, we have dark skin, or even though lighter skin, we still have that uh, predominant indigenous phenotype, right? Phenotype mean that's how the look and the features, the appearance. And but I do have cousins, some who are half black, half half white. Some who really look white. Some who identify more with being white, maybe. Um, and so yeah, even though predominantly we're a Mexican Chicano family, and I have cousins too. Again, that have like their their mothers or their fathers, who I'm not related to, are might be like Oaxacan, or some of them are Spanish. So they some of us have more or less of certain elements, even though technically we're all generally mixed. Everyone's mixed, as far as people in general, humans in general, especially in this country, United States, everybody's mixed with something, right? So again, it goes back to the concept and the idea that genetics does not equate to identity. Genetics does not equate to culture, cultural continuity. Genetics doesn't equate to indigenous trajectory, like I said before. So that needs to be clear as well. And one example that I use a lot is like Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, he was on the George Lopez show some years back, and George Lopez was doing these DNA tests for people for his guests. He would do it every. I don't know how long he was doing it for. Anyway, so Snoop Dogg got his DNA back, and he came out I think like 25% Native American, right? And that's cool, right? It's always good to know, like, your the DNA makeup. It helps kind of get give you a better story, give you a better understanding of the history and story of how you came to be. So, but even though he's like 25%, Native American, American Indian, what have you, um, he still carries a very strong, African American dominant phenotype. The way he looks, right? And like his culture is black, and he walks and um, walks in the sense that he perceives, and he goes through his life interacting and being interacted with as a black man, right? So that's what I mean by the indigenous trajectory, the cultural continuity. A lot of us, despite some of our admixture, there's still the way that we walk, and the habits and mannerisms that we possess, and the way the world responds to us, and the things that are being dealt with us, and the social situations that we're dealt with, that clearly shows we are on an indigenous trajectory. Again, Mexicans are not a monolith, as far as there's a lot of people who don't people who are Mexican, and they might have a lot of the Mexican national culture, but they're not really from that indigenous trajectory background. And that's not to, like, this, or like kind of say we shouldn't be cool with people, because we're all trying to find community somewhere, and in the sense that it's a very human nature to want to be accepted, and by your peers, and by social, your social environment. So, but of course, by the same time, it is important for us to really be honest with who we are, and understand our culture, where we come from, and so we are able to better decipher a lot of these inclinations and issues that we have as people, right? A lot of our issues that we're facing today, let's say, like negative issues, alcoholism, or machismo, violence, or what have you, gang violence. A lot of that's rooted in um, a lot of that's rooted in things of our past. So the more we are honest with who we are, the more we can be honest about um, some of the information that we can use to better ourselves and our family. So that's one thing right there. The next thing I wanted to talk about is a lot of stuff. Like I'm always there's things that I understand and I know, but a lot of times like I didn't go to college, at least not for like any type of sociology or more formal type cultural studies. I've just read a lot of books. I like to think I'm pretty smart, very logical, um, very experienced. I went to college for like mostly design classes and technology design classes, stuff like that. But so I'm always trying to. I understand ideas, and when I read books, I it helps me to gives me language to try to express what I'm trying to express, things I understand, things that I see, and experiment with certain theories. And the more you read, the more you can kind of connect dots, and it gets pretty fun. It gets very exciting. But anyways, the I wanted to introduce this concept of this word. It's called habitus. I forgot who the guy who came out with it, but some sociologists from decades back. But and again, back on the concept of indigenous trajectory, cultural continuity, and of genetics not equating to identity or culture, right? So habitus. Here's my notes. Habitus is a concept that refers to the way people perceive and respond to the social world around them. It describes the norms, values, attitudes, and behaviors that are shaped by a person's socialized experience and environment. Habitus refers to the deeply ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions that we possess due to our life experiences, particularly our early upbringing. It shapes our perceptions, actions, and reactions in various social contexts. Bordeaux is his name, Bourdieu. According to Bourdieu, habitus is developed over time through our experiences in different social fields like family, school, and work, and it profoundly influences our tastes, choices, and lifestyles. This concept is used to understand how individuals and groups navigate their social world unconsciously, guided by these ingrained habits and norms. Habitus is not fixed, it can evolve over time as individuals encounter new experiences and environments. However, it tends to ensure some consistency in how we interpret and respond to the world around us, often reinforcing existing social structures and power relations. Google it, habitus. So in this case, we do have indigenous habitus. Um, so again, too, it's not really about denying the Spanish blood per se. Like I said, we all have mix, especially in Mexico. Obviously, a good, many of us have, Spanish elements in us. I did my DNA. I think I'm like, I was approximately 40. I was like 48 European. No, no, wait. Yeah, was it 48 European and then 52 indigenous, or the other way around? I think it might have been 48 indigenous and then like 52 mixed, like, Spanish, Iberian, I think some Italian, North African, things like that. So, anyways, but again, indigenous continuity, sorry, indigenous trajectory, indigenous continuity, indigenous habitus. That's what it's about. It's not about denying that we have Spanish blood. Just to get that clear. Also, too, I want to. It kind of speaks to um, the aversion and subconscious triggers to identifying with indigeneity. So we also have to acknowledge that Mexico was conquered. At least the initiation of the conquering was what in 1524 or something like that, right? That's when the Spanish toppled the Tenochtitlan. But of course, it didn't happen overnight as far as like the um de-Indianization process, right? So you figure over these last 400, 500 years, whatever it's been, this constant demonization of indigeneity, whether it's looking indigenous or like again the indigenous habitus the indigenous, culture, mannerisms, speech, anything indigenous, indigeneity, right? Um, Centuries of that being demonized and ridiculed, um, and with the European element being rewarded, right? So the more that we acted, or we spoke Spanish, for instance, or we tried to lighten our skin, or look more, act more, or had more of a European habitus displayed, more European, Spanish, Iberian habitus, the more we were accepted, right? So there's that creates, you know, there's the idea of epigenetics, right, where we carry on, the trauma in our DNA, right? That's like a proven fact. It's always been indigenous knowledge, right? We always known that, DNA memory, but of course, recent science in recent years has been validating it. Of course, since people don't believe it until you know Western scientist does their studies, right? So within that trauma, we carry a lot of that same trauma, right? And whether we understand it consciously or subconsciously, it's there in a lot of us, right? Some more than others, maybe some not at all, but it's there. We have trauma, we have historical trauma in our DNA. That's just a fact, right? So it's natural that some people would have an aversion to claiming their indigeneity, right? And when I hear that statement too, like, oh, why don't we need to that we need to acknowledge our Spanish blood? We have to, understand we are Spanish too. When I hear things like that too, I say I can't speak to every situation, but a lot of times, that's what I hear too, depending on how it's being said, or the context or the energy of it. But I hear that trauma. I heard, like, that fear of, like, claiming the indigeneity, claiming the indigenous. It keeps I think it's a way for us to psychologically find comfort in keeping ourselves connected to whiteness, right? Like, some people, like, oh yeah, we're indigenous, but they always want to keep that white foot in the door. And again, too, like, again, we're all different. We don't all have the same background, but most of the Mexicans I know are pretty, we're, again, indigenous, like strong indigenous trajectory, strong indigenous habitus, tendencies, etc. So I think, like, and that's always a lot of the reason for a lot of these labels, like Hispanic and Latino. A lot of it's very imposed. That's why a lot of times a lot of our leaders and people, like, they're very adamant about keeping those terms, because it gives them, you know, a foot up in, Latinidad, European whiteness, right? As whites, that's an aspect of white supremacy, the system of white supremacy, right? So that's what I also see. In the last item, some of those comments, people were saying, it might be a little off on the topic, but Mishika Aztec centrism, right? So, like, they were saying, um, oh, yeah, it's good that we celebrate our indigenous roots, but everybody just wants to be Aztec, right? Everyone wants to be Mishika, and even though we're all different nations, which is true, we're all different nations, right? We're all, but we also have to remember that a lot of times when people cite, like, Mishika centrism, usually I notice there's a lot of people who were uh, formerly from Mishika based organizations and had a fallout. So I just think a lot of times, a lot of people, there's a lot of, like, critics out there, not to, digress too much, but a lot of times there's a lot of critics out there of, indigenous concepts and what have you, but a lot of times they're kind of reacting out of, like, I guess their own, bad experiences with other teachers or organizations. But anyways, on the topic of Mexica centrism or Aztec centrism, you have to remember too, like, again, too, a lot of our identity was erased. So, and people reference, oh yeah, you know, uh, the Criollo government of the early, 20s or 1910s or whatever in Mexico, who, wanted to homogenize, not homogenize, but they wanted to, create, like, a national identity based on, the Aztecs or whatever. So, and that's true, But we also have to remember that, um, the Mexica, the Aztec, they held sway over the majority of Mexico. And even the areas that didn't conquer, they had, there's a very strong, relationship. Also, all people had to really, know each other's language, but especially the Mexica, because of their domination of the area of the majority of Mexico, right? And so that was like a lingua franca, I guess you can say. I don't know if I say franca, whatever, but basically like it was like kind of like how English is over here. Like there's a lot of other languages, and people speak different things, but there's kind of like a predominant language, right? And that was the Nahuatl language. You had to know Nahuatl for trade and obviously diplomacy reasons and whatever. Plus it's just in our nature as indigenous Mesoamerican people to know, I guess Native people in general, but to know multiple languages. And there's that, right? And then also once the conquest was in place, right? Post conquest, when the Spanish started to come and the Catholic Church, and try to convert people and just jacked up our whole shit, right? So a lot of what they were doing was trying to homogenize the indigenous, other non Nawa speaking, or maybe even non Aztec. Because there's like, don't forget, Mishika, they're considered Aztec, but a lot of times Aztec is also referred to a lot of people, Nawa speaking peoples, right? It's not just the Mishika, Tenochca specifically, but um, so um, they try to, format, other indigenous nations and into what they were familiar with, which is the Mexica, Nawa, um, I guess format and language so that they could better and easier convert and teach and convert and do all that stuff, right? So that so a lot of this identity, it's already happening, right? And then of course, through those 1930s or whatever, aspects of that were reinforced. So you got to remember a lot of that, Mishika centrism. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, we don't want to erase other people, other native people and all that, and we want to acknowledge like the truth of the situations, but at the same time, like, um, we have to, be honest about where that Mishika, a lot of the inclination, obviously, lack of education. There's a lot of things that are at play, right? A lot of, history kept from us. So there's a lot of factors at play, but also, um, we shouldn't demonize the fact that, we're a very tight knit nation. Again, too, like Mexica, none of these tribes in Mexico were created in a vacuum, right? They were all interdependent. They all learned from each other. Calendar systems. Um, so much that they, people picked up and learned, and from each other. Like for instance, even like Moctezuma, people talk about how the Aztecs conquered, and they're definitely bullies in the area, and they're very kind of imperialistic in nature too. But even like Moctezuma had, there's like temples with dedicated to other deities of other different nations and peoples, right, within Mexico that they quote unquote conquered, right? So again too, so just I guess with that note, just we shouldn't demonize um, that Mexica centricity. Again, we want to learn our indigenous nation. We don't want to erase nobody. We want to be truthful with who we are and our process. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like that Mexica centrism, it's that's where a lot of it comes from, and it shouldn't be demonized, right? Because ultimately we all share a lot of that culture is ours as well. I mean, I know it sounds kind of funny, or that probably doesn't sound proper, but hopefully you understand the point I'm trying to make. I know that might sound improper or controversial, but again, just we want to learn who we are, but also on that same note, we shouldn't demonize the inclination to always associate ourselves with Aztecs and Mexicas, because that's part of us. Even if we might be from different tribes, all that energy, that Mesoamerican energy, a lot of that cultura is, it was already, spread around, and things happen through history and stuff happens too. So we shouldn't really demonize that. Just kind of try to improve and do right by the knowledge and the power that we have as Mesoamerican, as indigenous people, to just do better for our people. The last concept, the last thing that was said, like in that some of that same note, was that we are a new, unique nationality of people, right? And that's that whole mestizo identity thing, where like people, oh, we're a new nation, and mestizo. La raza cosmica, etc. Right? And so, but this is just a way to disconnect us from indigeneity, right? This whole mestizo, it's not an identity. It's just a way to disconnect us from our indigeneity. And it's funny because till this day, I'll hear people like, some of these. Just the other day, I was watching some clip on YouTube, and there was a Mexican dude, like he's like, I don't know if a Mexican national for sure. He looked very, very looked very white passing for sure. So I don't really know his background or what, so I couldn't say. But judging from the way he looked and the things he was saying, just very washed, very, really promoting the mestizo identity. Because somebody asked him about like Mexican, some Hollywood Mexican producer or something like that. I forgot. Anyways, but um, it's just it's we really have to make sure we battle and defend our indigeneity. Of course, again, even those who might not claim it. But I think that's all. This video's under 30 minutes so far, so that's pretty good. Again, too, not too sure if you noticed the new mic here. Trying to up my game. I don't got a I don't have a lot of space here in my little casita here in Venice, but making do with what we can and try to bring more educational commentary videos. So again, thanks for everybody who watched that last video that I made, and tune in for the next one. And again, to a lot of this information I have on identity and some of these concepts that I mentioned, you can find them on the website sixsunriders.com. That's Six Sun Riders, and again, the links are they'll be in the caption, of course, on the page. So I'm available on all socials: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, not too much, or X, whatever it's called, but I'm trying to be more focused on YouTube now. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. And if there's any topics or things you guys want me to touch on, hit me up, throw them in the comments, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. Salute.